All right, welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. This is for those of you who have been on the other sessions, this is the second in the K2 for SharePoint beta sessions. And we're going to be talking about how to use the K2 Smart Forms. Last time we looked at basically building out the smart objects for lists and libraries, and now we're going to look at how we can extend those with some additional UI. So let's go ahead and jump on in. So just a quick agenda. We'll do a quick overview of where forms fit into kind of the overall picture. We'll spend a little bit of time for those of you who haven't seen smart forms before, haven't done a lot with smart forms. We'll do a little bit of some concepts around what forms and views and controls and rules and expressions are. For those of you who have used smart forms quite a bit, this will be a little bit of a review, but hopefully there's some good information in there for you as well. Once you kind of do that overview, then we'll look at how it fits into the SharePoint, the K2 for SharePoint offering. Spend most of the time in the demo, and then we'll wrap up with some summary and some Q&A. All right, so just a quick overview, and if you've worked with smart forms before, you've probably seen this this picture on the intro pages, but I think it does a good job of representing kind of how all these pieces fit together. So last week when we looked at building out smart objects that represented our our SharePoint list and web service, as well as a a backend K2 storage location. We built out those smart objects, and then those smart objects will form the basis for being able to start building interfaces using the views, which depend heavily on smart objects, and then forms, which can leverage views. We'll see how kind of all that stuff fits together here in just a moment. Forms can stand kind of alone, or can be included with workflow, and we'll look at extending things with workflow next week. Just some high-level concepts here. What we're looking at right now is a K2 smart form, and the individual parts that make up that smart form are two views. There are different types of views, of course. The top view is a list view, so it's showing a list of items from a backend system, whereas the bottom view is more of an item view, looking at a specific item that was selected from the list above. On the views and the forms, there are controls that can be added, buttons and text boxes and images and things like that. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about controls and what they can do. You can also, for forms and views, have rules. So rules like when someone clicks on the Submit for Approval button, you can start a workflow, or when the form is loaded, you can execute the method that goes and retrieves all the list of customers and populates that list view. In addition to rules, forms can have what are known as states. States is something we'll look at in more depth when we look at adding workflow to our forms, because that's a common example. But think of states as alternate rule paths for the form. So if you pass in a state as a parameter to a form, you can change which rules execute and what the rules actually do. When you look at workflow, it's when a form that is used to kick off a workflow and then is also used as an approval step. If the form is in that approval step state, you would want to be able to show the actions to be able to take action on that task in the form, whereas you wouldn't want to show those actions, and it wouldn't have any context to show actions when you're kicking off the workflow from that same form. So it allows you to reuse the form without having to build an entirely new form just to handle a slightly different rule set. Expressions can also be added at the control level, so expressions allow you to do things as simple as combining two values. Here you can see that a city and state have been concatenated into a single control, but you can also do calculations and other different things within that expression editor. We'll look at that in the demo. All right, just when you're actually designing these views and forms, you'll be in what's known as the K2 Designer. The K2 Designer can sit externally. If you've worked with smart forms outside of the concept of SharePoint, this will look very familiar to you. But what's nice when we start looking at how we've embedded this within SharePoint, it'll be the same basic look and feel. You'll have the category browser on the left-hand side, allowing you to be able to navigate through the tree structure to find your artifacts and to categorize your artifacts like smart objects and workflows and forms and views. The main section there is for the actual design canvas, which allows you to view and edit the actual layout of the form or view. There's a breadcrumb bar at the top that kind of tells you which part of the overall wizard you're in. If you're in layout, you'll see the layout. If you're in rules, you'll see a rules editor, and so on. In the layout form or view or in the layout page, there's a toolbox, an additional toolbox there for being able to see your list of controls and fields and methods. And when you're working with a control or a form, you'll have some properties associated to it, things like the name of the field, of what the value is, if it's bound to a data type, and some expressions and styles and all sorts of stuff can be configured from the properties pane. There's also wizard navigation at the bottom for moving through the different pages. If we look at views, views are kind of that first level building block of smart forms, and they're used to display data, capture input, and kind of host controls. Views, well, the really nice thing about building views is that they are a reusable component, and we'll see in the demo how we can build a view that's kind of generic that could then be used across multiple different forms or applications without having to be changed or modified. It's a really nice kind of a component, reusable component that you can use when you're assembling forms and building applications. There are two types of views. There's an item view, which will show you that kind of single item or single entity that you're working with, and then there's the list view, which will show you a list of entities or entries for being able to look at a list of customers as an example. If we look at the item view specifically, you can have kind of an editable item view with editable controls, or a read-only item view which can have the controls disabled, or you can actually even change them from being text boxes over to data labels, and we'll look at some of that in a little bit. But that's kind of the basic two types of item views. On the list view side, same kind of thing. You can have a list view that just shows you a read-only list of items, or an editable list where you can actually start adding additional items to that list, adding, editing, deleting, and so on. Good for when you're doing things like, if you're doing an expense claim application, adding the expense line items, quote line items, doing that kind of master detail kind of scenario there. On the control side, there's a whole lot of controls that are available out of the box in the toolbox when you're building your forms and views. Additional controls are being developed as we speak to be included, and you'll see some of the new controls inside of the K2 for SharePoint offering. There's also some additional controls that we're working on in terms of being able to do things like workflow reporting and a work list control and so on. So the list of controls is going to continue to extend over time here. It's also an area of extensibility for you as customers and partners to be able to go and build kind of your own controls if you see a need for something that doesn't exist out of the box today. There's white papers and things on how to start getting started building your own controls to include in the toolbox. So a nice area for extensibility there. Controls can optionally be mapped to smart object properties or not. You can have controls that are unbound for being able to capture or show information that maybe doesn't necessarily need to be bound to a back-end system. We'll look at that a little bit in our demo later on. We can also change, there's default types or default control types based on the smart object property. So if the smart object says that the item is a date time, when you drag that item onto the canvas, it's going to automatically want to use a date time control, but you're not bound to use that. You can certainly go in and change that. If you wanted it to be a read-only view, you could change it to a data label, or you could change it to a text box. You saw probably in the initial demo that I did where I changed the account text box field into a picker control to actually go and pull information from Salesforce.com. That's another example of changing that control and potentially even binding it to external objects that aren't necessarily what the form or view is bound to. which is the point there. So a little bit about rules. So rules are kind of, if you will, a light programming logic that's executed when certain events occur on a view, a control, or a form. So they kind of can be scoped at each one of those levels. Conceptually, the rules are made up of a statement that says when something happens. So you define what the when is, what's the event that triggers the thing. You can optionally provide a condition. So if some condition is true, and then there's the kind of the action. What are you going to do? Are you going to execute a method? Are you going to hide a control? Are you going to navigate to a different URL? So on. So for example, a type of a condition might be if a value is greater than some certain limit, then kick off a workflow. So some examples here: execute a smart object method when a control is clicked, populate a drop-down list with smart object list data when a view is opened, start a workflow when something happens, open a subform, commit changes on an editable list to the backend system, or chain smart object methods, for that kind of master detail entries inside of a database. So there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do there with the rule logic, and of course much more. So conceptually, when you're looking, or actually when you're looking at building the rule, you'll see that it kind of breaks down in the rule wizard to those three types. At the top, you see events, conditions, and actions. So the event, when you pick it from the rule selection, it'll be kind of a natural language thing where you say, well, the event I want is when a control on the page raises an event. When you add that condition to the rule definition, you get hyperlinks for being able to configure what control and what event. So when you select the button control, it'll surface what events are available on that control, and one of the events is clicked. So that's kind of how you can configure the actual rule to be specific to what you're trying to do. When you go to conditions, same kind of thing. You can say select advanced condition is true, and then the advanced condition editor will let you specify things like if it's less than 2 or greater than 1,000, then we do something. Also on the action side, same type of thing. You might want to execute a smart object, and so when you select that, then you go and configure, I want to execute a particular smart object and execute a particular method on that smart object, and then you can configure what the inputs and outputs are for that. And we'll look at configuring a couple rules in the demo in a moment. Just a quick note on expressions. Expressions are configured at the control level. So in this particular example, you can see that we've got a subtotal, a shipping amount, and a tax amount. If you want to display a total of all those values, you need to be able to take the and add those things together. You need to take the subtotal plus the shipping and plus the tax, and then that will equal what the total due is. So on the total due control, you can configure this expression, and that means that anytime the subtotal is changed, or the shipping is changed, or the tax is changed, it will recalculate what the total due is based on that expression. So that's just kind of an example there, and we'll look at configuring an expression in the demo as well. Just a couple notes on that. A good note, expressions can be reused on the same view. So if you create an expression inside of a view, you can reuse it on that view. But currently there's no way to save that expression as a server-side kind of expression that you can then use on any view or any form. It's a feature enhancement that's been logged, and we're looking into that. So then when you start actually assembling all these views and things onto a form, you can start doing like what I showed in the initial kickoff of the beta program, is the idea of being able to surface information from multiple different business systems using views and controls that talk to different line of business systems. So here we have some information like a list of customers coming from CRM, maybe account manager information from SharePoint, and some list of documents from an Office 365 site. And so that's where really the power comes in, is that you can start reusing and recombining and and pulling all these different controls and things together and views together into the kind of application that you want to build with tabs and all that kind of good stuff as well. So that's kind of the quick whirlwind overview of smart forms. If you're really not all that familiar with smart forms, highly recommend looking at the training material that's available on the K2 University site to get familiar with that. There's nothing really all that new in terms of how the smart forms work when you're working with SharePoint. The big key when we start looking at the K2 for SharePoint app is that because now we've architected our K2 for SharePoint offering so that everything that we are surfacing from SharePoint is done so through smart objects. Any smart object can be used, to build views and forms. And so that's where that nice integration comes in, is that we can now start building these smart forms against lists and libraries. But much like we saw last week, we're trying to make this very simple for people to get started. So inside the SharePoint Design Canvas, we were able to last week, actually generate the smart objects without having to go and specifically open up a blank smart object canvas and actually start building in all the properties and methods ourselves manually. We were able to just click a button and generate that stuff. And so similarly with the smart forms, we're offering an ability to be able to auto-generate the smart forms for you, which includes, in a SharePoint context, that includes an edit and a display form that basically can be used to replace the default optionally replace the default SharePoint new edit and display forms, so that when someone goes into a list item and clicks new or clicks edit, they can be directed directly to the K2 Smart form rather than the default SharePoint form. But that's something that is configurable, and you can turn it on and off. You can also build your own forms from scratch and use those. You don't have to use the generated forms, or you can extend the generated forms, which is kind of what we're going to do today. And in terms of the smart form design experience, much like our smart object design experience that we looked at last week, it's all surfaced within SharePoint. So there's no need to leave that browser session or even open up a new tab or anything. You can do it all directly within that same window. So let's see what our demo scenario is. So last week, just to recap, for those of you who may not have attended last week, basically what we did is we created an expense item SharePoint list and generated the SharePoint list smart objects for that expense item. We then went in and created a brand new smart object for capturing comments, and in that case we used the K2 Smartbox tooling, which means that the Smartbox backend, which basically means that it's all stored within K2 and we don't have to worry about creating or managing a data source behind the scenes. It's new information that we're going to store. We also associated that comments smart object with expense items in a way that we can say that for every list item in the list, we can have an individual comment thread for each one of those, so kind of a one-to-many relationship there. So we created that association. We also then went in and created two smart objects for dealing with currency conversion. There's a web service out there that returns a list of currencies, so we created a smart object that actually returns that list. And then the same web service has another method that allows you to actually take the two of those currencies, pass them in as inputs, and then it'll give you the conversion rate between them. So a from currency and a to currency, and then you get the rate. So we created that smart object. So what we're going to go ahead and do this week is we're going to build some views and edit some forms to build out a little bit more rich scenario around this list. So we're going to generate the default forms and views for that expense item list. Then we're going to go ahead and create a currency conversion view that we can then add to that edit view, so that we're able to do the currency conversion from within the edit form. Then we're also going to create a comment list view that we're going to then add to the display form for the list, so that we can, when we're actually just looking at a particular list item, we can see the comment thread and add to that comment thread within that form. So without further delay, let's go ahead and jump into doing the demo here. So let me just get my environment up here. So here's that expense items list that we were working with last week, just with a couple of items and the default categories and columns that we were working with last week. If we jump into the list settings and go to the K2 application, we'll be able to jump right in to see those smart objects that we were working with last week. So the smart objects for the currency conversion, the default generated smart objects, and then the smart object for the comment threading. So just give a second while that loads up here. Okay, there we can see that list, and then there was that one view that we created just to kind of see that that we could, what the smart objects were doing in terms of being able to retrieve and work with data. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I don't want to start from scratch. I could go in and I could say new, and I just want to create a new view and start building out new views and forms. But I want to take the easy route, and I'm just going to go ahead and generate forms for this list. So that's going to take me to a page where it shows me, the option to create the smart forms, and then I can check the box basically to say that we want to have these smart forms that are generated replace the new edit and display forms for this list or library and be those default forms. So I'll just go ahead and click on OK so that it goes ahead and starts working on that. And once that's done generating, we'll go ahead and jump back out into the list and then kind of see what those default forms are. Without having edited or done anything with them, there is a fair bit of capability that they will already have that we can take advantage of. So we'll just give that a second while it generates those. Okay, and there we can see now we're back at our expense item application page, and you can see that a couple new things are available. We'll see 3 new forms, new edit and display like I was talking about before, and then we'll see the new edit and display views as well. So the views are kind of where all the meat is, and then the forms are just basically single view forms at this point that then get surfaced surfaced in the forms there. So if we jump over back to our expense items list, and we now go and select to edit one of these items, what we should see is, rather than seeing the default SharePoint form, we'll actually see the K2 Smart form, and you'll see that some controls have been automatically selected for us based upon the type and based upon the information that was selected in the SharePoint list. So we'll see title is just a text box, but the description is actually a rich text. Because we selected to use rich text inside of SharePoint, it uses the new K2 rich text control that's being made available as part of the K2 for SharePoint offering. You can also see that we've got amount, we've got due date, which is a date and time picker, or a date picker in this case. The reviewer is our lookup control, which can look up into Active Directory. Approved was a Boolean field, the yes/no field, so it gives us a checkbox. Category was a choice, and region was a lookup. So all these controls have been properly added based on their types and allow us, full functionality to be able to edit these list items. We also have another view down here for dealing with attachments. It allows us to add attachments to the list, and you may have seen that view in our list of views that was created as well. So we can go ahead and cancel out of that. If we take that same item and then we go and look at the view we will see, or the view form, we'll see that we get a similar type form, but where all the controls are in kind of read-only mode. They're showing us just the the data labels for the items that in that list. Let's go ahead and close that. So that's kind of the default forms, and those are fairly useful initially. But let's go ahead. We want to look at how we can do make some changes and add some additional value here. So if we go back to our expense items application, I'm going to go ahead and take the edit expense items view, and I'm going to right-click and check that out, so that I can make changes to it, and then I can go ahead and jump in to the edit mode. So there is some basic version management going on here, the ability to check out, make changes, not have people overriding your changes. People who are not the designer of the form, won't be able to see any of the changes until you check them in. So you can work on forms while people are still using the old versions of the forms. There's also capabilities to be able to jump back to cancel checkout and go back to the previous version of the form. And behind the scenes, the forms are extensively versioned, and some additional UI and tooling will be made available in the future to be able to kind of roll back multiple versions and some additional functionality like that. So what we can see here now that we're in the edit layout view of our form, when I was showing you the navigation, we still do have our standard navigation of the category system on the left-hand side. It's just been minimized for now because it's taken us directly into the thing that we want to work on. We can see that we have our rich text control here, but it's the size is a little bigger than what I want it for my purposes. So I'm going to go ahead and drop this thing down, by 100 pixels down to 250. And if I look at the control, there's some additional properties that I can set for this rich text control. I can decide whether or not I want to show the HTML view option and the preview option, so I can take those away. I can also specify which toolbar items I want to show. So if I wanted to, not show the ability to do indenting, I can uncheck that as an example. Some additional things we can do around controls. We can look at this category choice control, which is right now selected to be it's bound to the items category smart object. So we could change that if we wanted to. But what I want to look at is changing this from actually just being a drop-down list to being a radio button list instead. Just for my purposes, it looks a little bit easier to use there because we only have a couple items. So other things that we can do, if we look at the amount text box, we can go ahead and we know that that's going to always be a currency, so we can actually change the style in the properties window here so that it displays it as a currency with either using the user settings from the browser or statically defining a particular set like the English style with 2 decimal places and the dollar sign in front of the number. So go ahead and click OK to do that, and those are just a couple of quick little changes that we can make. I think that's all I wanted to do there. So let's just go ahead and click Finish. When I click Finish, that saves those changes back. It's still checked out, so only I, as the person who edited it or has the item checked out, will be able to see those changes. But if I jump back to this view now, back to our list, and go ahead and look at the edit item view again, we should see that it's changed slightly based on the changes that we've made. That rich text control has some limited options and is a little bit smaller, and our dollar amount comes through as a dollar sign, and our radio button list here is now, or our choice category is a radio button list. So those are some just kind of basic changes that we can make to enhance the user experience within our forms. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to look at being able to take the amount and potentially allow the person to be able to go and convert that to a different currency. So the way I'm going to do it is rather than going into the edit view, so I could actually just go back into this edit view and start adding controls directly onto that view that allow me to do the conversion. That you pass in the value and you execute all the rules and do all that kind of stuff inside that view. But for reusability, I'm going to think about actually making this as a separate view that I'll pop open from the edit view, do the conversion, and then pass the data back. That makes it a reusable view that I can move across multiple applications within my environment. So I'm just going to go to the new menu here and select to create a new view. So from scratch, just a new view. You can see it's showing us that we're going to be creating a view. When we go into the details, we can provide a name for this. So we'll call it the expense item currency convert view. There we go. And I'm going to select that the type of this view is going to be an item view, and then I'll click Next. I have the option to bind this directly to a data source, but I actually don't need a smart object data source behind this. This is really just to do a calculation and then pass some data around. So I actually don't need this bound to a backend system. I'm not saving or committing anything to a backend system from this view, so I'll just go ahead and leave it unbound, which is an option that we do have. I'm going to generate a blank layout with just 4 rows and 4 columns, and go ahead and click Next. So there we can see our default layout there. I'm just going to start adding some things here for the layout of this view. I'm going to use a data label control here, and this is going to be the label for, let's see, our local amount. And then I'll go ahead and add a label here, which we'll call currency. I should probably put some text in these So I want that one to say currency, and I want label local amount to say local amount. The reason I'm giving them nice names is for when we start working with rules, especially not so much with labels, but especially with text boxes. You want those things to be very clear when you're looking at your rules. So this will be the label USD amount, and call that USD amount. There we go. And then I want one more label here for showing us the rate. Okay, then we'll start putting on some text boxes, but actually I'm going to take my table and I'm going to merge a couple of cells here to get a little bit different layout. That one. There we go. And then I'll go through my controls here and grab a text box and put it there. I'll call this text box local amount. And I don't need any text in these. That's right. Okay, so let's get another text box for the USD amount. And one more for the rate. And then I'm going to use a picker control for the currency because what I want to be able to do is actually look this up from our smart object. So let's go ahead and scroll through the properties here. We'll have the ability to specify which smart object we want to use. And the smart object that I'm going to use is the one we created previously. So I'll go to portal, list, expense items, expense item currency. And that'll bring back a name and a value. You can search by name. It'll show the name and display the name. So we'll just click that, and that's all we need to do there to configure that control. And then I need a couple of buttons here. I'm going to do a button for clicking OK and a button for cancel. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and move those to the right. There we go. So now we got kind of the basic layout for our view. Now we need to just add some functionality behind this view to be able to do this conversion. So the first thing we'll need to look at is on the USD amount, we want this text box to be automatically populated with a combination or a multiplication between the local amount and the rate. So we take the local amount times the rate, and that should be what the USD amount calculates to. So we can do that functionality through an expression. So I'm just going to go down on that text box and select expression, and we'll go ahead and create a conversion expression, give it a name. And then we have kind of an expression details section, a preview, and then our context browser. So the first thing we'll need to do in our context browser is go to the function that's actually going to be able to perform that multiplication for us. So this is where we have functions for regular expressions, text value, aggregations, date and time, conversions, all sorts of different things here. But I'm going to grab multiplication, drop it in the drop zone there, switch back to my context browser, go into my view, and find the controls that I want to use. And this is, again, why we specified that we wanted the controls to be properly labeled so that it's very easy for us to know what we're doing here, that the text box that contains the local amount will be multiplied by the text box that contains the rate, and that will be the result will then be stored or shown inside the USD amount text box. So that's fairly straightforward, but how do we get the rate into the rate text box? We have the currency, which will automatically then look up the currency, but then once that currency value is changed, we need to go and execute a method that does the actual currency conversion for us to give us the proper rate. So we're going to go into our rules section here, and we're going to add a new rule. So when do we want this to happen? We want this to happen when the control on the view raises an event. What control do we want? We want that pick currency picker control, and we'll select that when the changed event occurs. We're not going to specify any particular conditions. We want this to happen every time. And what we want to have happen is we want to execute a smart object method. So we need to go and find that smart object that we created for being able to look up the conversion rate. So I'm going to go into lists. I'm going to go into expense items. This is where we stored it last time. We have the expense item rate smart object, and it has a method, one method called read, and that method has two input parameters. The input parameters are from currency and to currency. We're going to hard code to currency to be USD because we're always converting back to the USD amount, but the amount that the local amount is going to be something that's selected by the picker. So if we just drag the picker across, that will then load whatever the selected picker amount is into the from currency, and then use that as the input. On the return or output mappings, we'll see that we get a rate returned, and we'll just map that directly across to our rate text box. So now when that changes, when the rate changes, it will change the rate text box. The rate text box is used in the expression, which will then change what the calculation is for that USD amount. So if we just go ahead and click Finish, we're all done with this particular view. We can go back to the our application here, and we can actually just take this view that we've created, this expense item currency convert view, and just to make sure it's working properly, let's just go ahead and run that. So it'll just run it within the browser here, inside of the SharePoint environment. We pass in, let's say our local amount is 100. I happen to be sitting in Canada when we made this expense. Tab off of that control, it'll look up and find that Canadian currency. Now it's executing the smart object that's taking the Canadian currency and the USD currency and giving us what the conversion rate is, and then the expression took the conversion rate times the local amount and gave us what we expect, which is 96.82 if the Canadian amount is 100. So that's a fairly simple thing. We haven't wired up our OK or cancel buttons, but we'll do that in the context of the other view when we add this to that. So that all works very good. So let's just go back to our application page here, and now we can go back into our edit expense items view and add a way for people to be able to pop up that view and do the currency conversion. So I'll just take a second to jump into that design canvas again. Okay, so what I'm going to do is on the amount, I'm just going to move this text box out of the way here for a second because I'm going to put a layout table. I have to be on controls if I want to find a layout table. Take the layout table and just put it inside this this cell, and I'm just going to make it a 2-column by 1-row table. Then I can put this text box back into the left side of it, shorten the size a little bit, and then go find a button. Control, somewhere here, there it is, and put it in the right-hand side. And I'm going to call this button convert currency, and I'll give the text currency, something like that. And let's go ahead and justify that to the right, and then we can drag this over a little bit more, make it look nice and clean. That's probably good enough. Okay, so then we need to configure, so we just added the button now. Now we need to configure the rule that says what happens when we click that button. So if we go back behind our rules, I have a couple of pre-configured rules already, but we're going to go ahead and add a new rule for when a control, similar to last time, when a control on the view raises an event. This time we're going to select a button control, and clicked is the only option for that button. Again, we're not going to use a condition. We're going to go into actions, and we're going to just do a quick search here. I want to open a sub view. So I'm going to select which view I want to use, and that view will come from our category system from where we just created it, which is the expense item currency convert view. And we can configure some options for how that thing opens. So we can actually configure the standard width and height. So we want to make it not too big, so we'll make it 600 by 250 pixels. Click Next, then we can actually pass in some input parameters. So from our edit expense items, we have the control that contains the current amount, which might already be there. Let's just drag that amount and throw it into the local text box. So assuming that that's what they want to use as the base for what they're doing their conversion on, then they only have to pick the currency and that's it. So we'll just do that and click Finish and finish on that rule. That's all we need to do there. But now we need to add another rule. actually two more rules to handle what happens when on that sub-view when the OK button is clicked or when the cancel button is clicked. So let's go ahead and add in a rule for that. So we need to find the sub-view section. So when a control on a sub-view raises an event, it already knows which sub-view we're working with because we only have one on this view. We're going to say when the OK button is clicked, the action is going to be to transfer that data back, transfer the USD amount back into the amount field, which is fairly straightforward. So just open up the configuration of that, find our control that contains the USD amount, text box USD amount, and throw it onto the amount control in the Edit Expense Items view. And then we're going to do one more thing. We're going to close the subview. There we go. Last rule that we need to configure is for what happens if they click cancel, which basically means we're not going to transfer the data back. We're just going to close the view. So let's find a subview. Control on a subview raises an event. Okay, or the cancel button, and then we'll just do close. Okay, so that should do it for this edit view. One other thing I'm going to do, just because I've done this before, I noticed that the display or the edit form itself is a little bit narrow. So I'm going to go ahead and check this out and show you editing the form where this view, this edit view, actually lives. And what you'll see when we go into the design canvas is that some of our controls get a little bit cut off here with the defaults width that's used for this view. So I can go ahead and select the view, and then I'll have properties for how wide that thing is, and I can go ahead and make that, let's make it 700 pixels wide. And that should give us enough room to see all of our controls. All right, so nothing else I'm going to do there. We'll go ahead and click Finish. That should save that back. Then if we flip back to our expense items lists and we go into edit mode, or the edit a particular item, should see our little convert currency button there and our extended width. Once it loads, I can click on the convert currency, which is going to open the little pop-up for us, which has it populated that local amount, and then we can say, well, let's do our Canadian currency conversion again. Pull the rate, give us a USD amount. One thing I'd probably want to change on this is I probably wouldn't want to show the additional details there. I can make this a currency field as well. But when I click OK, it'll bring that back, and it rounds it there in that amount because that's been configured as a currency style to only use the 2 decimal places. So you see it brought it back, and then we can go ahead and go down and click Save to save this back. So a quick little way to add something that is normally fairly laborious to go and open another browser window, find the currency conversion service, do the currency conversion, come back and make those changes. In line within that view or in that form, we were able to add that functionality. And that view now, that currency conversion view, is a reusable thing that we can take and use all over. Anytime we need to do a currency conversion inside of a form, we can use that view to do it. All right, so that's it for the edit form. Now what we're going to do is go back, and we're actually going to create a view for this comment threading that we were talking about. So this time we're going to be using a list view. We're going to be using an editable list view, and we're going to be hard binding it or binding it to that currency smart object. So we're going to create an expense item comment list view. So click Next. We'll select the list view. We do want to pick a smart object here. So again, navigating not through Salesforce but through SharePoint into our category for list, expense items, and then selecting our comment smart object. There we go. That's going to go ahead and then bring back an ability for us to kind of auto-generate what we're going to show in this list view. We just want to show the comment, the user, and the date. And we'll enable some list editing, so we'll allow people to add new rows but not not delete or anything like that, or modify, because this is kind of a history of comments, not a, you don't want to be able to allow the editing there. So we'll click next. That'll generate that for us, and you'll see at the bottom it shows us the section that will be used when the item is being edited. So one thing we want to do is this is the column that would show the user. We don't want people providing their user information. We want it to actually be based on who they're logged in as. So we're going to switch it to a data label, and then we'll populate it in one of the rules a little bit later. Same thing with date, and that shouldn't be backdating any of their comments, so we'll switch it over to a data label. That's fairly straightforward, but the edit item we'll use there. Okay, so we will add a rule or go and modify one of the rules that we currently have on this to say that when the add toolbar button is clicked, we can go ahead and do an action to transfer in the current user and current date. So let's go do a configuration on that. So we have the add edit row with the data labels, and then we have our system values here, which will show us the current user, and we can use the fully qualified name, so it's so it is the actual unique user, and then we can use the current date as the data for that. Okay, click finish, and then that's all we really need to do for that particular view. Now we need to go and wire that up inside of the form for the display. So I'll go back and check out our display form and go and edit that. Okay, so let's, this is the kind of standard display view, but now we need to actually pull in another view, the view that we just created. So we're going to go into our category browser and find that view. So there we have the comment list view, and we'll drag it onto our canvas here, and we'll see the drop zone for the view. And it'll show that view that we just added. We can call it comments. And then we need to configure some rules to make sure that the comments that it loads when the form is opened are the right comments for this particular item. And then when the save button is clicked, we need to make sure it saves it with the context of this particular item. So just a couple of rules that we need to configure here on this particular form. So let's go in. You'll see that there's a lot of rules here, but you can see which locations these are coming from. Some of these are view rules that are just being exposed here so that we can get a full context of what's going on. Some of these are some sub-views and some form views as well. So what we want to actually find is the first one that we're going to do is when the form is initialized, you want to make sure we're loading up the right set of comments. So at the very bottom of this, we're going to add an action to be able to execute a view method. And the view we're going to execute is our comment list view. We're going to execute the getList method, but we're going to provide an input parameter that will filter it based on the ID of the item that's the SharePoint list item. It's fairly straightforward to do inside the configuration here. We'll be able to see, give that a second there. Okay, so we have our display expense item, and we have the smart object representation of that. And we have the ID for that list item, which we can pass to the configuration value that we used for the association to load up only the things that come back with the expense item ID that matches. So go ahead and click finish there, and then finish again on the rule, and that's that rule configured. Then we can go ahead and say that when the save button on the comment list view is clicked, we need to make sure we're also saving the ID back. So we're going to add, or actually what we're going to do is we're going to disable the default rule, and we're going to configure a very similar rule. We're going to execute a view method for items that are in a specific state. So the view is the expense or the comment list view. We are going to execute the create method, and the state is going to be added, much like the one up above, but we'll be able to configure that we pass in that ID from the expense item view. So if we go into display expense items back and find that ID and pass that in as an input, And then to make sure that the other inputs are set correctly, we'll find the view for the comment list view, and we'll grab the smart artist, we'll grab the comment and map that to comment, user to user, and date to date. And that should do it for the configuration of this form. So let's go finish everything off and go see how this works. Okay, so jumping back, if we now go into this same expense item and then we say view rather than edit, we'll see an entirely different view. We'll see the view details, or the expense item details on the left-hand side. We see that comment list on the right-hand side. There are currently no comments for this item, but we can go ahead and add a comment. So we'll add some comment and go ahead and save that. And you'll see that it passed in my current credentials as the administrator and the current date. If I go ahead and close out of this one and then go to a different list item and say view item, we'll see the same thing, but we shouldn't see that there is a comment for this item yet. So it shouldn't load any comments, and that's good. Now if we go back and we go back to the item that we were on, that we did add a comment for, this time when we load it up, we should be able to see that it loads up the associated comment to this particular expense item. There we go. So that all worked as expected there. So that's kind of what I wanted to show in terms of working with views. The last thing I think I forgot to show earlier is that if you did at some point want to change which forms and views are used as the default forms, there is a Manage Forms settings section here, which will allow you to specify when you create a new item, do you want to use a specific smart form, whether it's one of the auto-generated ones or the default, or switch it back to the default SharePoint form. So you can actually switch that back very easily whenever you want within that interface. There's also a capability to delete or regenerate the forms from within this environment as well. So let me jump back into the slide deck. I know we're running short on time here. I have to minimize this. There we go. So just kind of to do a little quick summary, what we looked at today was kind of the basics around being able to work with forms and views, how we can generate the default forms, modify and manage them all within the K2 for SharePoint tooling. We didn't have to leave any of our design experiences or the SharePoint experience in order to do that. All of the K2 design tooling that's necessary is hosted within that SharePoint environment, and makes it very easy for us to work with and build these applications around the SharePoint lists and libraries. We also looked at how we can create views for the SharePoint side of data, SharePoint lists and libraries, but also web services and SQL-based or K2-based data storage. So it's very easy to start bringing in those other line of business systems, building interfaces on those, building views that you can then use as reusable views that can be used across different applications. So next week what we'll do is we'll take a look at extending this even further. So right now all we're doing is we've got data and we've got forms, and that actually provides us a significant amount of value, hopefully for what you've seen today. But now we can actually go and start adding some of the K2 bread and butter of being able to now start workflow enabling this, routing around for approvals, doing tasking and all that kind of stuff, using some of these forms that we've created. So that's what we'll kind of look at next week. And with that, go ahead and see if there's anything sitting in our Q&A manager that Cody hasn't been able to get to yet. Let's see. Looks like we don't have a ton of questions, so hopefully that was informative. Obviously, if there are questions that come up later on, you can send them to the beta alias, and we'll get answers to you. Hopefully everything is going well with the beta. If there are any concerns or issues, if you're having trouble getting an environment up and running or anything that we can help you with, or any feedback that you want to provide, please do let us know. This is an important product for us. We think there's a lot of power and capability that we're adding here, but we want to make sure we're doing the right thing. So please log that feedback if you have anything. All right, we're at the top of the hour. I think we'll go ahead and stop the recording and end the session. Everything will be posted out to to the normal places later on. I'll send an email to the beta or to all you about the session for next week as well, so you can get registered for that. Thank you all for attending.